Welcome to the University of Maryland, Baltimore 2020 David J. Ramsay Entrepreneur of the Year presentation. This program is being recorded and will be posted on the UMB website, umaryland.edu. Later in the program, following the awardees' presentation, the audience will have an opportunity to ask questions. Please identify the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Select Chat with Host and write your question there. When the time comes, just listen for your name. Your mic will be unmuted for you. Now let me introduce University of Maryland, Baltimore President, Dr. Bruce Jarrell.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Alex. Welcome to all of you there in the audience to the 2020 Founders Week David J. Ramsay Entrepreneur of the Year presentation. Our award winner today is Dr. Joe Scalea. But before I introduce Scott Plank, who will introduce Dr. Scalea, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about this award because it becomes particularly relevant today. But you notice that we called it the Founders Week David J. Ramsay Entrepreneur of the Year Award. Many of you remember Dr. David Ramsay. I remember him with affection. Dr. Ramsay passed away this past June. He was a transformational president in a number of ways, including the establishment of the biopark across Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. David and his wife, Ann, actually created also Founders Week, and this was 25 years ago. And it was one of the actions that he took that has become a great UMB tradition. And it really is to allow us to celebrate individual accomplishments at the UMB level. And one of those accomplishments is the Entrepreneur of the Year Award. When you look at Dr. Ramsay's accomplishments, perhaps his biggest impact on UMB was the effect that he had on entrepreneurism. He came from UCSF, where he had played a major role in launching their biotech program in San Francisco, and of course he launched the biotech program, the biopark program here, which has created many jobs in West Baltimore and has certainly strengthened UMB's ties to the West Baltimore community. When David arrived at UMB, he barely found a tech transfer office at UMB. We just didn't have startup companies here. They didn't fail because they didn't start. And David obviously dramatically changed that and created an infrastructure that was an office for entrepreneurial activities and to encourage faculty to do entrepreneurial things. And this has continued to grow over the years. It is certainly fitting now that we honor Joe Scalea for this work, but also David Ramsay, who made it possible. Like David Ramsay, Scott Plank, who will give our introduction today, has also had a tremendous impact on Baltimore. He has developed and has demonstrated a passion for creating sustainable communities. And he continues to transform depressed, overlooked areas in the city, including our own West Baltimore community, with his own real estate development company, Warhorse Cities, from which I've heard many presentations. Scott also transformed an abandoned pier in Fells Point. Some of you may have been there, the Pendry Hotel. It is a phenomenal location, and even if you don't stay there overnight, you ought to at least go there for a meal because it really is phenomenal. In addition, his philanthropy to a myriad of organizations, from schools to the performing arts, and most recently to support fighting this COVID-19 pandemic, has improved and changed the lives of people in our city and beyond. Along with Joe Scalea, Scott is also one of the founders and CEOs of MediGo, a company which created a hardware and software platform solution that revolutionizes the transportation of organs for transplantation. Scott Plank is a man who walks the walk and has committed his time and resources to Airfare City, and I might add Airfare University. So I'm very happy to welcome Scott Plank to introduce our David J. Ramsay Entrepreneur of the Year. Scott, welcome. And get off mute.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I got you. You're good.
Actually, I'm already off mute, supposedly.
I just unmuted you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, it wasn't my fault this time. Yes, thank you very much. I mean, there's a lot to say, but thank you for the great intro. I don't know that I did as good a job on Joe's intro as you did on mine, but thank you. And I will just, since you brought it up, West Baltimore is near and dear to my heart. Biopark's been a very important driver. And, kudos to University of Maryland for focusing all their work in West Baltimore, where we've actually spent a lot of time with the police station, with other pieces there. So it's been a great partnership. So today we're here to talk about Dr. Joe Scalia, Entrepreneur of the Year, and my partner in a number of endeavors, my mentor in anything transplant, as well as just so many different things. But I wanted to say that I got to meet Dr. Scalia because I read in the newspaper that there was going to be a flight happening, and I thought that's pretty cool. I'm interested. So I called him up and I asked him if he wanted to get together, and he graciously agreed to come over to the office. And some people would say I come in like a hurricane. Well, I don't know what he comes into, like a category 5 or something maybe. But we really hit it off well, had a lot of conversation about UAS and the importance of it. And candidly gave me tremendous insight into who he is. And what I mostly look for when I think about a partner or an entrepreneur is what we would call shared values. And those values are collaboration, impact, importance to the community, a number of things that you might expect. But it was one of the most important things that I look for, and certainly Joe has that in spades. The other thing I look for is, what was really cool is how well Joe focuses and sells his idea, because really being an entrepreneur is about selling your idea to everybody. First, of course, you're selling it to your family, and I know his partner Megan very well now too, and I know that he's selling her every day and she's selling him. And then it's also about the enthusiasm, which plays out in two different ways. It plays out in passion, certainly, but most importantly with Joe, it plays out in genuine emotion. And that emotion is what I think connects me so much to getting involved with what we're doing here and leading some of these efforts, because it is that emotion of really understanding the donor family through Joe's eyes, and the recipient, the number of people waiting for organs, all of those things that this group, of course, already knows that, but is very new to me, and I think very new to the general public. So, beginning that endeavor with the unmanned aircraft systems really shows people a lot about what could happen, but also I think brings to light for the general public the importance of transplant, and candidly, the importance of each and every one of us being a donor. So I think that's a pretty cool and interesting byproduct of that. I think the other thing I would always want to focus on is, and I think this carries out with University of Maryland too, is the pride that I have when Joe is representing me or representing our company. And maybe that comes from him representing his own patients so well. Again, getting back to the importance of what we're doing within Medigo and with Mission Go on the organ movement, is the focus on how can we do this better and increase the number of organs over time, increase the quality of the organs, as well as, most importantly, increasing the outcome for the recipient. So that level of passion and emotion, I think, is what's critical, and what candidly makes a company an impact company versus a something else. So I would just like to close with saying how I think proud that I am that Joe is representing Baltimore so well, University of Maryland so well, and then has been able to, as I said, sell his idea and convince so many people like myself to put time, money, and effort. I like to say that I'm very fortunate to get involved in a lot of things, and this is one that I actually took a CEO job because probably so much because of Joe's emotion, the impact, and I think the importance of what we can do together. So very proud to be here, but mostly proud for my partner, Joe. Congratulations on your big award. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Alex, is it time for me to present?
It is time for you to go. Let's see your presentation.
Wonderful. First, I just want to say thank you, Scott. It's an incredible opportunity that you've been able to give me, a dream of mine come true for sure. Dr. Gerald, thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of these ideas with the group here today. Dr. Lau for the nomination, and Dean Reese for your ongoing support. With that, I'm going to go ahead and when I'm able. Alex, if you could allow me to share my content.
You should have the ability to do that right now. Oh, wait, hold on. Go ahead.
All right, there we go. Share. Okay, can you see it all right?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. So, wow, this is fantastic. Thank you so much. Despite these incredible times, here we are leveraging technology real time in order to experience Founders Week, not in front of each other, not shaking hands and clinking a glass of champagne, although that would be fun. But we're able to do it here virtually. And so it's an incredible time, but we're going to use the technology that we have to get the most out of it. This is incredibly exciting for me, incredibly humbling, but really a wonderful opportunity to show you what the Maryland community is capable of. This community is incredible. Engineers, doctors, hospital administrators, helipad workers, all have come together to generate ideas and substance that has been led to the formation of two companies that, as Scott briefly introduced, are really launching the future of transplant care. This presentation represents 5 years of ideas, the cumulative efforts of hundreds of my closest colleagues, many of whom I now call close friends, and thousands of hours of hard work. And sometimes I want it to stop, but most of the time I don't, because it's been so much fun. I'm telling you a story today. I'm going to take you from the beginning to where we are at the development of both Mission Go and Medigo. My goal is to share with you a vision for the future of transplant care and how important it is that we begin to use innovation to change the way that we practice medicine. This project has given me the opportunity to identify a clear career path, but most importantly, how I envision using the rest of my life to help others. And so thank you again. We call this rejecting the status quo because, as you're going to hear many times, elements of this were met with skepticism. And as I begin, I'm going to give you my disclosures, I think most of which you know, and some of which are the genesis of this talk. But I'm a passionate transplant surgeon. I talk fast, and I get very excited because I think it's important, and I really care about what it is that I do. I get paid to do organ transplants, so I guess if we do more transplants, that's beneficial to me. I guess you're supposed to know that. Got lots of research funding so far, and hopefully more to come. A couple of NIH proposals currently in the queue, Dean Reese, just so you're aware of that. Founded a company in 2018 with the help of Scott, which then really launched the company that we're talking about today, Medigo, in collaboration with Mission Go, where I hold positions as CMO and founder. You guys may or may not have seen this slide before. This is an incredible slide. This slide shows you how many people in the United States are listed for organ transplants and compares it with the number of people who donate organs. If you look at that green line, deceased donor organs recovered, it's stagnant. It really hasn't changed much. And over that same period of time, we've seen an incredible increase in the number of people that are listed for a transplant. Now think for a second, it's 120,000 people a year sort of grappling for about 25,000 kidneys and about 8,000 livers amongst thoracic organs as well. It seems like a huge disparity, and that's true. But the reality is the problem is even bigger. 15% of US adults have chronic kidney disease. 15%. There are 330 million people in this country. At this point today, 1.5 million Americans need a transplant, and 900,000, according to the Centers for Disease Control, are already on hemodialysis, a bridge therapy to transplantation. But we've only listed 10% of that number. There are so many people to treat. And while it's exciting that the number of transplants has gone up by about 20% in the last 5 years, we're still not doing as good a job as we could. And when I completed my training at the University of Wisconsin, where I studied clinical and surgical transplantation, I was recruited back to the University of Maryland, where I did my surgical residency as the director of pancreas transplantation. I'm like eager beaver, all excited to get fired up and started. And I've been named a director right out of training. I'm super excited. Wow, isn't that great? But then I realized that this is the reality. I'm the director because nobody else wants to do it. The number of pancreas transplants around the country has gone down steadily since 2003, with the biggest decreases in solitary pancreas transplantation, mirrored less so by decreases in simultaneous pancreas and kidney. And so this is what I came to face at the University of Maryland, but I knew some of the data and I began to read on it, and we realized that giving somebody a pancreas transplant and a kidney transplant together affords them a beautiful long-term future that certainly exceeds getting a kidney transplant alone. And we said, this is a great operation. You know, why are we not doing more of this? So I sat in my office here, you know, in the first couple of months as new staff at the university, and I'm saying, how are we going to grow this program? And it struck me that I had a really hard problem on my hands. And when you have a hard problem, you go make smart people solve it for you. So we got everybody in a room together and we began to talk about the challenges. And it struck us really that everyone had been siloed. People were separate. Surgeons were sort of waiting for patients to come along. You know, the nephrologists were waiting for patients to get transplanted. The endocrinologists were using insulin because they hadn't heard from surgeons in a while. And the coordinators and the nursing staff are just trying to keep their head above water. And we said, maybe that's not right. So we got everybody in a room all together. And we said, guys, here are the data. Is this something we want to do? And everyone said, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's do this. So we implemented a protocolized approach where every member of the team, not just a surgeon or a nephrologist or an endocrinologist, but a medical assistant, a nursing coordinator, anyone could identify a patient who needed a pancreas transplant. We recognized that anyone was able to do that using a very innovative educational and multidisciplinary approach to that problem. And published in AJT, you can see that at the time that we implemented that process in September of 2016, the number of pancreas transplant evaluations began to go up. And it began to go up a lot. So much so that by 2017, we were the busiest program in the United States. And that's a position that we continue to have. And with great pride, all of you here at the University of Maryland should know that we have amongst the highest quality pancreas transplant program in the United States, if not the world, with a 30-day patient survival of 99%. And as we grew, and as we began to bring in organs from all over the country, California and Washington State and everywhere around the nation, I began to realize that it was getting harder and harder to move organs. When you move an organ or ship it in from outside your region to in the region, as shown here in the panel, the number of hours that accumulate between coming out of the body and getting transplanted begins to go up. So much so that sometimes you can't even do the transplant. And I'm sitting here shaking my head like, that's not right. I got somebody dying with diabetes and kidney failure. How come I can't do a transplant? Oh, well, there's no flight. What do you mean there's no flight? American Airlines gets to tell me if I'm allowed to do a transplant and save someone's life? I don't think so. Oh, well, there's no flight. You know, commercial airline schedules are not set up to manage transplants. Well, you can spend $80,000 and courier an aircraft. It's exorbitantly expensive and non-sustainable. And so we began to realize there's a major problem. There's a major bottleneck in the process of moving organs. We need innovation. Our enviable system in the United States is amongst the best in the world, okay? And it still has major problems. There are not enough organs recovered, and it's resource and time intensive to move organs. And there are many times my patients don't get a transplant simply because of timing. And beyond that, because we don't monitor them when organs are shipped, I've had patients sitting on OR tables who were woken up because we didn't have organs that arrived. They were lost. In one case, they were lost in Tennessee when they were supposed to be at the University of Maryland. And I said, we can do better. We monitor every aspect of the donor and the recipient's care, and we don't monitor anything in the middle. Which brings us to the subject of innovation. And that's really where the crux of this talk sits. Innovation is a term thrown around a lot, but it has a definition and it's important. Innovative things must be new, but new things need not be innovative. Things that are new are like this pen. I can go buy a new pen, right? It'll look a lot like this one, but it's new. We've all seen it before and experienced it, but this one for the first time is new. An invention, however, is something you haven't seen before. It is a created product that you're not familiar with. It's both new and it's an invention. But is it better? Is it better than what we already have? And that's the distinction between invention, new, and innovation. Innovation implies that the technology created has a contribution that has not already been realized. And when those innovations are so dramatic that they displace an existing market or industry, we call them disruptive. So when we apply those ideas and those techniques akin to both pancreas transplantation and other med tech technologies, we realize that this is our current system of organ shipment, all right? We have an organ procurement organization burning the midnight oil over a cup of coffee to call a disgruntled surgeon at 2 o'clock in the morning, not that that's ever happened, to try to find somebody to go to a small hospital in the middle of nowhere on a plane that they hastily try to arrange in order to get an organ in a courier to a tarmac to meet these guys who put it on one flight that hopefully gets to another, and such and so forth. This process takes an incredible amount of time. And in a recent case, more than 29 hours of our time to move an organ just from Alabama to Baltimore, all right? It doesn't take that long to move a 10-pound box. And not only does it take a long time and is it very complicated with more than 50 people touching the organ, but it's extremely expensive. When we import organs, and these data come from my very good friend David Axelrod, who's at the American Society of Transplant Surgeons, and a gentleman with whom I work very closely on a number of different innovations for the field. David analyzed the cost difference for liver transplants, and when we do a liver transplant that's imported from another region, it costs almost $50,000 more in 2018 dollars. And so this is what I began to ask myself. Isn't there an easier way? Isn't there an innovation here that can improve the quality of life for our transplant recipients who are going to die on that list because there are not enough organs? So Dr. One picks up a cell phone and hits drone. And then the drone shows up and brings the organ to Dr. B, and Dr. B sews it in. Seems like a good idea. Of course, I don't know anything about drones at this point, but I began to ask myself, is this feasible? On demand, hospital to hospital, helipad to helipad, shipment of a 10-pound box for a human organ at any hour of the day. So this is good. So this is when I start making phone calls. So it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, actually on a Friday, and I pick up the phone and I cold call the aerospace engineering department at the University of Maryland, and Norm Wearley picks up the phone. He says, "Hi, this is Norm." I said, "Hey, Norm, this is Joe." And so Norm says, we started talking. I said, "Norm, my name is Joe. I'm a transplant surgeon. I want to put organs on drones." And then there was this long pause. And he said, "I love it. I think it sounds great." And we talked for about 30 minutes, and we're getting ready to hang up. I said, "Norm, I didn't even ask what your role is there." He said, "Well, I'm the chairman of aerospace engineering." I said, "Well, it's convenient. You picked up the phone." So we decided maybe this has legs. Maybe this could really work. So we began researching unmanned aircraft. We began asking ourselves, is it really possible to deconstruct the supply chain and the logistics of organ shipment in such a way that we could implement the use of unmanned technology? Well, unmanned technology has come an incredible distance in the last 5 years and exponential in the last 10. Huge technological advances, with some aircraft remaining in the air for more than 13 days without refueling. Days. Some aircraft go more than 200 miles per hour. There are all electric options, which is certainly important for the future of green technologies. And some medical UAVs have been implemented for research purposes abroad. So I take this to the Office of Tech Transfer that we just heard about, erected by Dr. Ramsay. And I go to the Office of Tech Transfer. I say, "Phil, Jim, I got this great idea. I'm gonna put organs on drones." And they're like, "Wow, first of all, can you please just calm down for a minute? That sounds great. It sounds crazy. It's way too big and too expensive." And these are some of the terms that we began to hear. Now, Jim, I would say Jim and Phil have been incredibly supportive of me, but these are real terms I heard from a lot of people along the way. And I just said, you know what? I know you might think it's too hard and too expensive, but I don't care. I know it's the right move. I know there's a way to improve this. And maybe it's not drones for every organ, but there is definitely a way to do this. So I begged the Office of Tech Transfer for some money, and I said, fine. If I can't put organs on drones, I want to at least understand where the organs are when they're moved, regardless of how they're moved. And I want to build a little box that will tell me what happens to an organ when it's being shipped. And they said, okay, fine. We'll give you some money for that. That sounds good. So I took that money, sorry, Jim, and I bought a drone, of course, which is what you do. So I began to work very closely with Norm, and I will say I'm being silly, but I did take that time and effort to build out the first ever organ monitoring system, which you see the user interface of here in the middle panel. We used a drone that was flown by Tony Pucciarella, who you'll hear a little bit more about later in this talk, which had 6 vertically mounted electric motors that functioned to fly the first ever human organ for research purposes. And that's what you see here. We did this in 2018, and it was subsequently reported in the American Journal of Transplantation and the American, and in the IEEE. There it is. And there it is. We're sort of ill-prepared for any sort of media component. That's a selfie and a video that I took of that event. And during that time, we began to collect data. I said to myself, if I'm going to suggest to my colleagues that the current system is not meeting our needs, then how can I share with them the data that we collect when we do these experiments? So we use that monitoring system that measures temperature, pressure, and vibration, in addition to geolocation, to begin to compare what it looked like when you move an organ by one means versus another. And we found that we chartered an airplane as a comparator, and when we moved the organ by airplane, we found that there were dramatic differences in vibration experienced by organs that were moved using traditional flight, but that those large changes in G-force did not happen when we moved an organ by drone. Now, that does not imply that one is better than the other, but merely that there are detectable differences in environmental factors experienced by organs during flight. So we've tried this now. We've tested it. We did the first 13 flights. We moved organs up and down in hover. We studied vibration, temperature, and pressure in a series of different scenarios. But taking this from concept is one thing, but bringing this into clinical practice is another thing. This is when I met Scott, and it's important chronologically to have his name here because Scott gave me added enthusiasm for the potential to really help people. He pulled me into his office at this time after seeing some initial media interest in the story about moving a human organ by drone, not yet for transplant. And he said, "You might be onto something here. I think this is wise. I've been thinking about UAVs for a long time." I said, "Very much appreciate that. And I would love to work together in such a way that we could begin to help the transplant community." So then began a series months of conversation with not only Scott, but OPOs or organ procurement groups around the nation who move organs. And they said, "We really like this." I went out to give grant before COVID, of course. I could go out and I talked to each of these individual groups. I gave a grand rounds on the importance of innovative transportation. And these folks, these different OPOs thought the idea was innovative enough to put their own money behind it. They each contributed money to help the research project advance. And at that time, Scott said, "I think we need to get together and put something together here." So with some preliminary data under our belt, we went to the state of Maryland, now TEDCO, and we said, we have a commercializable idea here that might be able to help save lives in transplantation. And so we got a little bit of money to build now a custom-built drone specifically for the use of organ shipment. You see here, it's in the University of Maryland colors. I hope you all appreciate that. This is a very, very sophisticated device, especially for its time. It had a 3D printed organ cradle you see here at the bottom, in addition to dual battery supply, dual power supply, in addition to redundancy of signal control, as well as this red thing here is a vertically mounted combustible parachute in case the organ went down. And just like pancreas transplantation, we got everybody in a room. We got doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, certainly the deans, and everybody from the University of Maryland campus, in addition to Baltimore Fire, Baltimore Emergency, Baltimore Police. And we said, we want to do something really special. We want to try to figure out whether or not we can actually implement the unmanned shipment of human organs into clinical care. So with some additional funding, we then built out now a second generation prototype of the organ monitoring system, at that time called the HOML. I'll show you some updated slides on that shortly. Here on the left side, you can see once we had the first transplantable human organ, we implemented our monitoring device. We could measure the temperature immediately around the kidney, in addition to the ambient temperature, and you can watch here the dramatic drop down towards freezing or just above. Here in the middle panel, you can see a screenshot taken from a video watching the temperature of the organ drop, as well as the graphical user interface for the first organ monitoring system, and certainly the one that was used in this case. On the right side, you see that we're now comparing shipment vibration of a car versus the drone. There was no statistical significance here, but there are clearly detectable events that occur and affect organs. And using all of those technologies, on April 16th, 2019, we got our group of more than 100 people together, many of whom were on site. And through the great gift of an organ donor, we were able to move the first transplantable human kidney by UAS using all of these different technologies designed and built here at the University of Maryland for shipment of that organ. That organ took 9 minutes and 52 seconds, which for me felt like about an hour and a half, during which time we listened to Rocket Man by Elton John, I'll let you know. And so during that 9-minute flight, the organ traveled to about 400 feet in the air. It landed beautifully on the shock trauma helipad. After transplantation, which you can see here, the serum creatinine dropped. That's the yellow bar, the orange bar, and the urine output picked up. The patient never required dialysis again and remains off dialysis today. We took some histological slides and we found that there was no vibration-induced injury to the organ before and after shipment. And this is me up for about 3 days at that time with Love, who works in our operating room, with whom I just worked this morning, putting in another kidney. And she was with me when we accepted that first organ. And unlike the first shipment, we were attention seeking here. We said, we want to tell the world what we've done. This is important. And we have an opportunity to really make a difference. This story was shared and exposed to more than 1 billion people worldwide. And this says to me 2 things. One, our team here at the University of Maryland did a good job. But 2, the world cares. The world wants to see innovations like this improve the way that we do things and help save lives. And here we are, it's really happening. And so what have we done? So many of you may have heard of that story, and I appreciate your interest in it, but we have not stopped. We are rocketing forward. There are lots and lots of new questions to answer. Getting back to Scott, you heard him mention Mission Go. You see here in the right panel of this frame, this is one of the new updated high-speed drones that carries more weight, travels further, and goes faster than our custom-built device built out of the laboratory. That we're going to hear about just in a minute. In terms of the laboratory, what we did was we leveraged those initial results from those early experiments where we were moving that transplantable organ for research purposes, during which we found changes in pressure. We saw changes in vibration and temperature, which affect the organ during shipment. But how do they affect the organ during shipment? So we took this data back and we built an animal model. You can see that in the right side panel. That is a beating heart. That is the beating heart of a mouse implanted into another mouse, transplanted. And in a series of animals, we began vibrating those hearts at the same rate that would be compatible with what we see in an airplane. And what happens? They fail. The extrinsic and environmental forces experienced by the organ during its time on ice affect its subsequent outcome. Well, now that's interesting. And why might that be? So then we began studying, well, what maybe cells are dying, and there are different ways that cells die, and you don't need to be a scientist to recognize the difference between the upper panel and the lower panel here. When we started taking those hearts out of animals in which the hearts had failed, we saw that there were higher levels of annexin. Annexin 5 binds to phosphatidylserine, which is a marker of apoptosis, of organized cell death. Cells telling themselves it's time to shut down and die. Why? Not clear yet, but it's clear that when we monitor these things, we begin to learn what happens during shipments. Hearts exposed to environmental stress fail, and when they do, we find microvascular thrombi, like is shown on the left in a failed heart. And we also see DNA fragmentation also associated with cell death, as you can see here in the right. On the left, on the right side of your screen, you see the dark green and black box. On the left side is a normal mouse where the heart has not been exposed to vibration. And on the right, look at that. You could see a dramatic increase in DNA fragmentation. That's basic science. But what about the real community? We went out and surveyed 174 transplant surgeons who are already members of the American Society of Transplant Surgeons and who take call for kidney transplantation. These are the people who actually move organs around the United States to help patients. And when we asked them, would it be beneficial to understand what happens to your organs while they are in shipment? 87% of them said yes. And not only that, they agreed further that the current level of technology in order to get organs from point A to point B is inadequate. We can do better. And do we mind if organs are used? No. Everybody thought that that was perfectly reasonable as long as it's studied in advance. And that's where we get to Mission Go and to Medigo. Taking all of that data together, we said this is important. There's a biological basis for what we're doing. We need to know when organs are going to arrive. We need to know where they are. We need to understand the logistics of the OPO. We need to have that mesh with the logistics of a hospital to optimize the shipment time and logistics in order to get that organ transplanted as fast as possible and as safely as possible. So working from the inside out, as opposed to industry coming into transplant, this is transplant creating an industry. Working from the inside out, we worked with OPOs. We interviewed every single OPO, all 58 around the entire United States, to learn what their bottlenecks were. What are the challenges in logistics and how can we help? Using our prototype then as a basis and a stimulus and an inspiration for more robust technology, we also heard from ASTS leadership. We heard from surgeons. We heard from donor families and business leaders to build out Medigo, which is the solution, the future for the innovation of transplant care. Medigo is the first company of its kind. It defines a category. Medigo sits between the donor and the recipient. It connects the two. It facilitates the logistics of an OPO to streamline a process that has not been streamlined. Why? Because our field evolved. It wasn't designed. Nobody wanted it to look the way that it is, but we are here to make that process smoother. And the value add is striking. Transplantation is a $14 billion per year industry, anticipated to increase to $25 billion by 2027 at a compound annual growth rate of 9.8%. And that's only attacking the 10% of the people that were currently transplanted. Imagine if we were transplanting that entire list. That comes at a total cost savings annually of more than $46 billion. Just for travel and travel agency alone, where Medigo can help, there is a $2 billion waste in the current system, and that is where we aim to help. With that as our foundation, we built a company called Mission Go that is spun off into Mission Go and Medigo under the leadership of Scott, Tony, and myself. We built out some incredible technologies to help understand what the future of transplantation is really going to look like. Mission Go completed the longest trip ever just last month, moving another organ in the state of Nevada, more than 10 miles. That is critically significant in the field of transplantation because, smartly, that organ, in the city of Las Vegas, no hospital is further than 11 miles apart. And so in this case, we demonstrated proof of principle that for at least a city like Nevada, UAS could be used to move organs from all hospitals, donor and recipient alike. But there is a ton of work to do. There is a ton of work ahead. 3D printed organs are being pioneered at other institutions. All right, this is my friend Anthony Atala. This is from his TED Talk. Please go ahead and watch that if you like. He's a pioneer in the field. Bioartificial organs are on the horizon. My friends at UCSF, with whom we collaborate on a series of different NIH grants, are working on bioartificial organs that help to clean the bloodstream, much like a kidney does, while you wait for a transplant. And what about organ perfusion? What about taking an organ that is broken and fixing it? My now very good friend, Martine Rothblatt, the CEO of United Therapeutics and prior founder of Sirius Radio, has taken a huge interest in transplantation. She, just like Scott, has recognized that there are people out there to save, and we can save them by smartly leveraging technology and improving the logistics of a challenged field. I've kept this presentation short. It's less than about a minute a slide, and I know I talk fast, but I want to spend the remaining 4 slides, which are the most important of the talk, thanking some critical people. Featured in the slide here, this is a picture taken on in March, early March of 2018, when we moved the first ever organ by UAS. On a kind of whim and a prayer for myself, I'm featured here with Matt Scassero. Matt is a very good friend of mine. He runs the UAS test site and was willing to take a risk on some pretty crazy ideas. Tony Pucciarella, who has now become a very dear friend of mine and is a business partner at Mission Go and Medigo. Tony was there acting lead pilot to help construct those series of tests, which were critical to identifying the preliminary data that got us to where we are today. Tony is the president of both Medigo and Mission Go and helping to innovate the future of transplantation as a pilot. And I think that that's critically important. Just like pancreas transplantation, we are not siloed. We are bringing everyone together on a common platform to try to advance a mission towards saving lives. I also want to thank lots of my friends here at the University of Maryland, which include all the physician colleagues with whom I work, as well as a bunch of OPOs from around the country who have supported this effort from the very beginning. Mission Go and Medigo, Paul Summers, dear friend of mine who operates mission control at both companies in order to implement these advancements around the United States. Tony, and of course, Scott, who's has sort of given me what feels like an MBA's worth of teaching, staying, I finish here at 5 or 6 and I go over there until 7 or 8, and we work real hard trying to advance this mission, sometimes at nights. He's been very kind to work around my crazy schedule because he knows that there is a really important reason that we're all here, as well as Amy Larkin, godsend to us here at Mission Go, Medigo, and my colleagues who helped found those companies. This is not a quote, but it's something I think to myself all the time, and I've never said it out loud, but there is no better collection than a history of mentors, and you collect them along the way, and you never have to get rid of them. And it's probably the most important collection you can have. And featured here is my Uncle Tom. This is a picture that I took from in my office. This is the last case I did in surgical residency, and he has been there for me as a surgical mentor since the very, very beginning, before I started medical school. And most importantly, the biggest thanks go to my kids, Aston, who's at home right now. It's him in scrubs. I took him to the OR. Don't show the dean that I did that. And my daughter, who's full of spunk. She's a future entrepreneur, I'm sure. And of course, my wife, who has allowed me to do this. Without them, I wouldn't be able to get any of this stuff done. So I just want to acknowledge those important people. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Thank you for helping my thoughts and ideas inspire the future of transplantation, if only briefly. And thank you for sharing a passion for helping patients with organ failure, because that's certainly why we are all here. And so thank you very much. I'll stop there, and hopefully we covered most of our bases.
All right. Well, we're open for questions for you, but perhaps it would be smart for me to turn to one of your panelists there, who is a very well-known transplant surgeon. I don't think you would mind me calling on him for a question before the audience comes in.
Okay. Well, first of all, Joe, inspiring talk, a lot of energy. I don't know how you keep that level all day. I wish I could. I'll say that. But congratulations on your accomplishments here, along with Scott. I'm one of those old guys who flew in Learjets to Columbia, Missouri, and places like that in the middle of the night, and took out one or more organs and slept in the tunnel pathway of the plane on the way back, and then we put the organ in right away. And it was very, very difficult in the early days to do that kind of procedure. And so something like this would make life a lot better. Of course, organ donation has gotten a lot better, and that more people are skilled to remove these organs safely. Tell us just a little bit about what you see as the limitations of the drone, particularly around distance and weather and mountains and things like that. And also, have there been any issues with interstate transport of organs from your point of view, or is that a non-issue these days?
Got it. So the first question is probably the most important. What are the limitations? What are the challenges? I put them into a series of different buckets, Dr. Gerald. And by the way, thank you for your pioneering efforts in transplantation and the stories of being in planes 2 o'clock in the morning. I've certainly been there as well. There are several limitations. One is technologic. Are the drones good enough? Can they go fast enough? Can they get the job done? And quite literally, that is a technological hurdle that can be solved. It's a solvable problem. These things are getting faster and stronger. To address that further, what's different between some of the small drones that I've shown you here and a 747? Most of those are flown without a pilot for most of their flight anyway. The reality is that what do we call a drone? What is a UAS? I mean, technology has advanced dramatically to allow aircraft to move from one point to another, helipad to helipad, with unmanned and under machine control. And so without being an expert in the field, it's been clear to me from my discussions with those technologists and engineers that while the technologies may not be here today to move an organ from the University of Maryland to UCLA, we are certainly on the cusp of being able to do this on a short scale. With regard to weather, they need to get stronger, be more powerful. They need to be flight tested and approved by the FAA in both cases, in all of the cases. And and you're going to hear about very soon from Mission Go. The aircraft that we use are FAA approved. They meet FAA flight worthiness criteria. In terms of long distance travel and interstate travel, that's really that gets to the second bucket, which is regulatory. The FAA is actively assessing the regulatory requirements around drones, and there's a specific drone committee to Congress that is assessing a very, very linear approach to the introduction of civilian drone use in the United States. And it's been anticipated by that 2025, more than 800,000 drones will be in the United States for commercial purposes. And so there are a series of hurdles that need to be accomplished there from a regulatory standpoint, and that will inform interstate travel. And so that's really a combination of regulatory and technical. The last two are medical and ethical. medical hurdles exist. What happens to an organ during shipment? Are we going to hurt the organ during shipment? I don't think so. But are there environmental factors that occur when you're up high if you don't have a fuselage? Do you need a fuselage? Does that inform the technological solution? I think that that's important. And then lastly is ethical. What do patients think? All right, is this scary? I mean, do they think it's appropriate for us to use organs to move, drones to move organs? I think the answer is yes, but just because I think so doesn't mean I know so. And I think that we got to get to the bottom of issues like that by moving things that are not necessarily organs ahead of adopting technologies like that. And so that's a lengthy answer, but I think completes the task.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting topic, and I'm sure we're going to see more of it in this world in no short order. Alex, you said you had another question?
We do. This one from Dr. J. Mark Simard. Are you there, sir?
I am.
Go ahead.
I don't think my video is working on this new computer, but here's my question. So tell us, Joe, first of all, Joe, a very interesting talk, very stimulating, great work that you're doing. My question relates to organ preservation during shipping. Is there some interesting work going on there to help preserve the organ while it's being shipped? And if your answer is yes, I could help you with some of the stuff that we've been doing in terms of preserving kidney from ischemia, maybe.
Yeah. So, Mark, thank you so much for the comment. Yeah. So there's a lot being done. There's a lot being done to. There's several topics in this arena. One is normothermic preservation. So keeping organs at normal body temperature. There's some thought that perhaps organs shouldn't be cold. They should just be kept at body temperature. There's some thoughts that organs can be super cooled, almost frozen very, very quickly in such a way that the organ is sort of completely static and metabolically inactive. And then there is optimization of cold storage, which is probably the most important topic. That's what we've been doing. That's standard of care. There is some work being done to optimize the shipment. I'd love to hear more about what your group is doing. A lot of what we're doing at Medigo is the conveyance, is conveying that critical information. What is happening to the organ? What is its status during that shipment, to give surgeons the peace of mind and assurance that when that organ arrives, it came out of the body as an A+, that it arrives as an A+, to steal a phrase from my friend Scott Plank. And so that's exactly the kind of technology that we are interested in.
So the other thing, Joe, this is Bruce. I want to make one other comment. But this also represents a significant collaboration with College Park. 10 years ago, if you were to measure the collaborations with College Park, it would be with a millimeter rule. Now I'm happy to say it's with a many-foot rule, and this is another example of one of those collaborations. And there's a rich overlap or not overlap, but complementarity of resources and capability at each campus. So that's another nice part about the project.
Yes, sir.
Alex, we have any other questions?
Yes, Mary McKenna has a comment. Mary, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So first off, Joe, I want to congratulate you on your award. It's well deserved, and I think the work you're doing is very exciting. And I'm sure you don't remember me, but I was the preceptor for your first year medical school PBL group. And everybody introduced themselves, with their pre-med backgrounds. And you kind of said, well, I don't even know if I should be here because I have an IT background. Is that correct? And,
yeah, right.
And I remember saying to you, you should never apologize for having a different background, because that gives you a unique perspective that no one else has. And I'm just very proud of your success, and keep up the great work.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Hopefully we catch up soon.
And Mary, I'm sure he does remember.
Yes, I do.
You are getting a lot of compliments for the presentation right now, but I do have another anonymous question. The questioner asks, how much research is being done to study ways to overcome the impact of transportation methods, various methods, on the viability of transplant organs?
So that's a great question. my key investor asked me the same question when I was in his office. He's like, "This is so obvious. Why isn't anyone doing it? Why hasn't this been studied?" And I think it's for a couple of reasons. It's not being studied, and there are really very few people doing it. There's some interest in it nationally, and I think perhaps suggest that some of this work has stimulated interest in it. But ever since we've had challenge, as transplantation has grown and evolved, really in the last 10 years, allocation strategies for how organs move from point A to point B has completely changed. And so I need to be careful with what I mean by study. So the United Network for Organ Sharing, or UNOS, has been very interested in where organs go and how they get there, right? That's critical to the ability to allocate, as it is to individual hospitals and centers. For example, liver transplant centers recently underwent a huge change in the way that organs are allocated, affecting their individual volumes and access to organs for patients on the waiting list. And so lots and lots of people have studied transportation in different ways. I guess what my implication is, we're sort of the first group really attacking this from on the donor table to on the recipient table, and digesting that logistics pathway in a new way. So very few people are doing it. I think it's because the field evolved. I think it's because there are not that many people in transplant, and I think it's because the topic is relatively timely.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Scalea, for that fascinating presentation. And you covered a lot of ground. Thank you to our audience for your participation. There is one more very important aspect to our Entrepreneur of the Year ceremony, and that is recognition for our outstanding researchers who've achieved U.S. patents in the previous 12 months. Here is Phil Robolato, Director of UM Ventures here at UMB and AVP of the Office of Technology Transfer.
Good afternoon. Thanks, everybody, for attending the virtual 2020 Entrepreneur of the Year ceremony. I'm Phil Robolato, the AVP for the Office of Technology Transfer and also the Director of UM Ventures here at UMB. And I just want to take a few minutes to quickly acknowledge all of our inventors that have had U.S. patents issued during the past year. And we started doing this little ceremony a couple of years ago just to acknowledge that it's actually quite an accomplishment to get a patent to issue these days. It takes a lot of time on the part of an inventor away from their research, their teaching, their clinical activities. They need to fill out a disclosure, take their thoughts, their invention, put it into paper, work with us and trying to translate that into initially a provisional filing, navigate the claim process, all the back and forth with the USPTO. And then after many months, years, if you're lucky, you will have a patent issued. So again, it is quite an accomplishment in and of itself. And with that, I want to say congratulations to the following individuals on behalf of Tech Transfer. So I'm just going to read down the list of inventors that have had new U.S. patents issued during the past year. First off is Dr. Laiji Wang. He is no longer here, but of course, his technology is the chemoenzymatic glycoengineering of antibodies and Fc fragments thereof. Dr. Wang is in College Park. And this technology is part of his startup company, GlycoT Therapeutics. Next, we have Dr. Bob Ernst, who is the former Entrepreneur of the Year just last year, seems like a long time ago, and also co-founder of UMB startup Patagon. His patent title is Immunotherapeutic Potential of Modified Lipo-Oligosaccharides and Lipid A. He also, want to acknowledge him as a co-inventor on a patent where Dave Goodlett, another co-founder of Patagon, is the lead, and that is methods for identifying fungi. So congratulations for both of those. Next is Fayez Rasool, and the patent is therapy regimen and methods to sensitize cancer cells treated with enzymatic therapy to PARP inhibitors in multiple cancers. This technology is actually involved with several sponsored ongoing clinical trials. Next, we have Steve Trapello. And Dr. Trapello's technology is coaptation ultrasound devices and methods of use. This technology is, of course, licensed to UMB startup Coaptech, which is doing extremely well, just announced another successful capital raise. And after that, we have two technologies to the team of Dr. John Wu and co-inventor Dr. Bartley Griffith on both. This is the first is the artificial lung system and its methods of use. And the next is the self-sealing cannula. And of course, both of these technologies were originally licensed to UMB startup Breathe, and very big news earlier this year. And congratulations to both of them in that Breathe was acquired by Abiomed back this spring. Next is Dr. Sanjay Kaushal for paraxylene films and therapeutic uses thereof. This technology was licensed to Syntac Medical Systems, which is a UMB Northwestern joint startup company. Next up, we have Dr. Matt Freeman for methods of treating coronavirus infection. This technology has been optioned to a Aikido pharma based in New York recently. We have Marianne Jabaris for histostatin 5-based synthetic peptides and uses thereof. This technology was the subject of a very well-received scientific review committee presentation not that long ago. Dawei Gang for methods of treating cardiovascular dysfunction and improving fluid homeostasis with a peptide hormone. This technology has been licensed to new UMB startup Active Fusion Therapeutics. And we have Dr. Pekson Zhang with co-inventor Dr. Reese. Use of trehalose for prevention of neural tube defects. And the inventors here are scientific leaders in the study of birth effects, and their resulting published work has spurred great interest in this particular field. Next, we have Dr. Haria Roos for diagnosis and prognosis of multiple sclerosis. Dr. Roos is a very active researcher and inventor in the multiple sclerosis space, very prolific. Next, we have Dr. Alex McCarroll for inhibitors of Notch transcription activation complex and methods for use of the same. This technology has been licensed to another startup, STEM Synergy, I should say, which is co-owned with the University of Miami. It's Dr. McCarroll's at least second startup that I'm aware of. So, next we have Dr. Jemmy Poth for techniques for producing an image of radioactive emissions using a Compton camera. And Dr. Poth is actively testing a clinical device prototype and is, of course, the last UMB winner of the Able Award, a very prestigious award that had been given out at the UMB Hopkins Alliance meeting. We have next two co-inventors, Dr. Bob Christensen and Steve Sellinger, for methods for assessing differential risk for developing heart failure. And this technology has been the subject of a potential collaboration with a local medical system. Next, Dr. Bruce Yu with co-inventor Dr. Mark Caraban. And the technology, the patent is biopharmaceutical aggregation assessment and counterfeit detection using magnetic resonance relaxometry. Dr. Yu is, of course, a very valued member of our scientific review committee, and we are actively marketing this technology. Dr. Elliot Hong was issued a patent for methods and systems for controlling magnetic fields and magnetic field induced current. This is another very prolific UMB inventor in the space, many disclosures. Dr. Mike Levine for devices and techniques for oral fluid collection and seroprotection testing. This is co-owned with Becton Dickinson and also a winner of the UM Ventures COVID Challenge from earlier this year. Next, we have Dr. Mark Samard for methods of treating neural cell swelling. This was licensed, of course, originally to Biogen and, to Remedy, and then subsequently through the acquisition of the technology to Biogen, where it is a subject of an ongoing clinical trial. Next, Dr. Eric Lillyho and co-inventors Dr. Versales and Dr. Simeon Goldblum for MUC1 active domain shedding as a hyperadhesive decoy receptor. There are a number of research publications around this technology, and it received an ICTR grant for translational work funding recently. Dr. Block actually has, Dr. Robert Block has 2 patents that were issued during the year where he was the lead inventor. and shares the first co-inventors Michelle Marquardt, Joaquin Muriel, and Megan Rizzo for regulating calcium in excitable cells with a novel protein. The second is with co-inventors Andrea O'Neill and Amber Mueller for methods of generating mature human muscle fibers. And Dr. Block and his teams are, of course, Dr. Block himself is one of UMB's most collaborative researchers. He has worked with many researchers within UMB and also at other institutions. Next, we have Dr. Howard Zhang, and with co-inventor Dr. Warren D'Souza for system and method for optimizing a treatment plan for irradiation therapy using multi-criteria optimization. And this is another very prolific team that has received a lot of interest from a number of industry partners that have licensed very closely related technologies, which has been created by the team. And we are actively marketing this technology. Next is Dr. Rafi Simon, who's no longer at UMB, but co-inventors Dr. Alan Cross and Dr. Sharon Tennant. And this is for broad spectrum conjugate vaccine to prevent Klebsiella pneumoniae and Pseudomonas aeruginosa infections. And we are actively in very active discussions with a major pharmaceutical company for this technology, which provided significant corporate funding for these inventors. Next up is Dr. Wuyan Liu, and for treatment of cancer and inhibition of metastasis using hemoglobin beta subunit. Dr. Liu, of course, founded Oncos Biomed based on several of his technologies recently, and that company is off to a very good start. Next up is Dr. Henry Szymanski, who is no longer at UMB, but with co-inventor Dr. Joe Lakowitz for plasmonic substrates for metal-enhanced fluorescence-based sensing, imaging, and assays for cells. And of course, Dr. Szymanski and Dr. Lakowitz are a very inventive team. Many of Dr. Lakowitz's technologies have been successfully licensed over the years. Next, we have Dr. Tony Antalis for engineered anthrax protective antigen proteins for cancer therapy. This technology was also the subject of a recent CELA option agreement. Dr. Mark Samard, I should have mentioned this earlier, a second one on the list here, therapeutic agents targeting the sodium ATP channel and methods of use thereof. And this, of course, is also licensed to Remedy and subsequently Biogen. Next, we have Dr. Vincent Enjar and co-inventor Purushottam. And this is for non-steroidal and steroidal compounds with potent androgen receptor downregulation and anti-prostate cancer activity. This technology was recently selected for NCI Stepping Stones program, which will support preclinical development of the drug candidate, hopefully getting all the way to IND. Very good news. Next, we have Dr. Jim Gammey for method and apparatus for transapical procedures on a mitral valve. And this, of course, was licensed originally to Harpoon, which was subsequently acquired by Edwards Life Sciences just a little less than 3 years ago now. Next up, Dr. Jeffrey Hirsch with Dr. David Eisenman for vesicular prosthesis and method and system for manufacturing the same. And we were working very closely with Dr. Hirsch, as an aside, on a prototyping space. So stay tuned for some exciting news on that. We will probably be having a seminar, which will be the first of a series of monthly seminars, probably starting sometime next month. And so the office will be communicating with you about content for that in the upcoming couple of weeks. Next on the list is Dr. Fangjin Zhu, compounds for treating parasitic infections. And this was part of a startup out of College Park. And I believe that startup is actually gaining some traction in recent months. Next up, we have Dr. Vincent Enjar again. I apologize, I should have mentioned this earlier. Methods of treating pancreatic cancer. This technology actually very valuable patent in that it's allowing us to potentially recruit patients for a phase 2 trial using a drug under this patent. So look forward to big news on that. Next up, we have Dr. Feng Zhang and biomarkers for diagnosis and prognosis of lung cancer. This technology was a recipient of a seed grant and was also a TEDCO MII winner back about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Next, we have Dr. Dudley Strickland for methods and compositions for modulation of the blood neural barrier. This was licensed to Paracrine Therapeutics, which is another joint UMB startup with the University of Michigan and with the Ludwig Institute. And last but not least, we have Dr. Colin McKenzie with co-inventors Dr. Shiming Yang and Dr. Peter Hugh for automated surgeon performance evaluation. And this technology, this is a software tool. It's been validated with multiple surgical teams and published. So that is our list of inventors with new U.S. patents during the year. On behalf of OTT and UM Ventures, congratulations again to all of you. Thank you.
You can see how important it was to see all of the patent winners of the year and to hear about their inventions. So thank you for staying with us. And thank you all for joining us today for the 2020 Entrepreneur of the Year presentation. Take care.
Thank you, Alex.